I'm Colonel Chris Behm, and for today's Patriot Breakdown, I'll be covering mission analysis. Plans are nothing, but planning is everything. Dwight Eisenhower said this many years ago, and it's because the actual act of planning allows commanders to make dynamic decisions later. And it's through the process of understand, visualize, describe, direct, lead, assess, that commanders actually guide their formation from where they are now to the objective that they want to achieve. And it's through mission analysis we develop the understanding piece. Now, the challenge with any planning operation is that you have so many pieces and parts that have to be done disparately. Someone is working the mission while someone else is working how the enemy's fighting, and someone else is working the terrain. So you have many separate people diving into a small part of the plan that somehow has to be brought together so there's shared understanding across the entirety of the staff and then eventually to the commander. Mission analysis is the stage that sets that for further operations and does so by answering several fundamental questions. Under these questions, we have all the outputs. All these outputs are pulled straight from the doctrine. The first fundamental series of questions is who are we and what do we need to do? This starts with the task work. What formation are we in charge of? What enablers are attached to us? What part of us are we losing? That gives you an understanding of what tools you have available in the operation ahead. Within that, you have to develop your problem statement and mission statement, so that determines how we see ourselves and our role in the larger fight. And equally important, though, is the higher mission and the higher intent. So as the battle develops and shifts, you can anticipate and shift with it. The next fundamental question is, where are we fighting? This gives you the idea of the realm of the possible within the physical space. First being, what actual piece of terrain are we going to actually have this battle? With those unit boundaries of understanding of where we'll be a part of, you then break it down with McCoo and the terrain effects matrix to see how your movement will be affected, how the enemy's movement will be affected against you. By understanding the avenues of approach, key terrain, all those different features will kind of play into what decisions your commanders and all the leaders can make as the battle progresses. And then obviously weather has impacts in terms of especially like aerial assets, but many of your assets are affected by weather, and civil considerations. How you can interact with population, what impacts they might have on you, and what impacts they might have on the enemy. Last is how the enemy will beat us. And what's important here is this is not just an S2 function. This is a whole of staff effort. What you want to have is you want to have your best planners put themselves in the shoes of the enemy and decide if they're going to give us the best look, how would the enemy beat us? Through that, they develop a deep understanding of how the enemy sees the battlefield and eventually how they might anticipate changes that occurs as the fight goes on. With that, doctrinally, you take the threat template, so how the enemy is expected to doctrinally fight. You then create 3 separate situational templates, and these are the course of action that you deem are the most likely the enemy is going to use against you, or better put, how if you were the enemy, how would you beat the blue force on the battlefield, which then creates an event template where that can drive your intel collection assets, because you can then put them against the different spots to determine what enemy COA is being used against you. When you combine all 3 of these together, you now have a complete picture of the operation. This gives not only the commander, but the staffs and subordinates a shared picture and shared understanding of who we are, where we are, how that impacts us, and how the enemy is going to fight us. So now in a dynamic environment from here on out, whether the fight starts in 10 minutes or 10 years, you have a shared understanding and a shared picture of how this battle will go, and you can easily and quickly coordinate as the battle progresses. If you answer these fundamental questions, you then answer Sun Tzu's dictum of if you know your enemy and know yourself, you need not fear in 100 battles. I'm Colonel Chris Behm, and that's everything for today's Patriot Breakdown.